The first time anyone saw Margaret Henley after the summer of 1980, she looked like a ghost trapped in her own skin. Her hair had gone grey too early, her eyes always puffy from crying or from sleepless nights filled with screaming silence. She'd been a mother of 3, identical triplets, the kind of rare miracle that made headlines. And then suddenly, she was nothing. It happened on a Wednesday, late August. Heat clung to everything in rural Virginia like an angry spirit, and the air buzzed with cicadas. The boys had been playing in the backyard, Simon, Samuel, and Silas, all 6 years old, wild, happy, loud. Margaret had gone inside for no more than 15 minutes. When she came back out, their swing set was swaying gently, empty. The little red wagon was tipped over on its side. The boys were gone. No screams, no footprints, no trace. The local sheriff called it a strange case. The FBI got involved. There were helicopters, hounds, a national manhunt. Weeks turned into months. The case ran cold. People in town whispered stories that the triplets were taken by someone in a dark van, that it was a cult sacrifice, that they wandered into the woods and got lost in the caves. Some even said Margaret had done something to them, lost her mind in the heat. But no one ever said that to her face, not after she threatened to shoot the last person who implied it. 29 years passed. Margaret never left the small farmhouse. She kept their room exactly the same. Bunk beds untouched, shoes lined up, dinosaur posters on the wall. She didn't celebrate birthdays, but every August 19th she would sit on the porch all night, waiting. Just in case. By 2009, everyone assumed the triplets were dead. The town moved on. Margaret didn't. Then, one morning in June, something changed. She was in the attic, sorting through boxes after a leak in the roof, when she found an old Polaroid stuck inside one of her husband's army footlockers. He'd passed away 10 years ago, a quiet man who rarely spoke about the war, and even less about the day the boys vanished. Margaret thought she'd gone through everything after his funeral, but somehow this photo had slipped through. She pulled it out, wiping dust from the faded plastic. Her heart stopped. 3 boys standing in front of a rusted pickup truck. The photo was dated October 1987, 7 years after they vanished. They were older, but Margaret would know those faces anywhere. The same intense blue eyes, the way Simon always tilted his head, Samuel's chipped front tooth, Silas with his lazy eye and that half smile. It was them, no doubt. Her fingers shook so hard the photo nearly slipped. Her breath came in short, dry gasps. Then something else, on the back of the photo, in her husband's handwriting. They're safe. Don't dig. Margaret dropped to her knees. Don't dig. Had he known something? Was he involved? Her mind spiraled through memory after memory, the late nights when he came home covered in dirt, saying he was out helping a neighbor fix their fence, the way he never wanted to talk about, that day. The anger, the silence, the alcohol, it all meant something now. She'd spent decades grieving, thinking the worst. But what if the worst hadn't even come yet? She clutched the photo to her chest, her breathing ragged, eyes wild. It wasn't just a memory, it was a message, a crack in the lie she'd been living under, and Margaret Henley, who'd once nearly drowned in grief, now stood up, more alive than she'd felt in decades. She was going to find them, even if it meant digging through everything her husband tried to keep buried. Margaret didn't sleep that night. The photo sat beside her on the small kitchen table she never used anymore. She stared at it like it would speak if she kept looking hard enough. The edges of the photo curled, yellowed with time, but the image itself was sharp, real. She'd thought she had let go of hope, but hope was a cruel thing. It came back fast, like a fire touching dry grass. She made coffee as dawn broke, her hands trembling. There was one place she hadn't looked in nearly 3 decades, not because it hadn't occurred to her, but because she'd been warned. By him, her husband George. Behind their property, past the garden and the old barn, lay a stretch of woods. Everyone in town called it the Devil's Mile. One narrow trail snaked through it, nearly overgrown now. George used to go there alone, sometimes for hours. Always came back dirty. He'd always said, nothing out there but bad air and old bones. Don't go digging where snakes sleep. But now she had to. She packed water, gloves, a flashlight. She even brought a trowel. It felt ridiculous, like some old ghost hunter, but the moment she stepped into those woods, her breath changed. The air was heavier, colder somehow. It was early morning, but the trees swallowed light. After walking about 20 minutes, she came to the old cabin. She had forgotten it was even there. It had belonged to George's grandfather, a hunter and drunk who disappeared sometime in the 1950s. The place was barely standing. Roof half collapsed, windows boarded up from the inside. But Margaret noticed something she'd never seen before. A new padlock. Rusted, yes, but not that old. Her heart thudded in her chest. She touched it. Cold metal. Real. She stepped back, and for the first time she noticed the footprints. Faint, but they were there. Not old, dried indentations from decades ago, fresh ones in the soft dirt. Someone had been here. Recently. She didn't go inside, not yet. Something in her gut told her this wasn't the time, not alone. Instead, she walked around back, and that's when she saw it. A small patch of ground where the leaves had been brushed aside, like someone had been digging there, or was planning to. She dropped to her knees and started clawing at the dirt with her trowel. The soil was damp, and deeper down it turned thick and dark like clay. Her fingers ached, but she kept going. 5 inches, 6. Then her trowel hit something solid. Wood. She scraped around it. It was a box. Small, maybe the size of a shoebox, wrapped in what looked like rotted leather. She pulled it free, heart hammering. When she opened it, a smell hit her, sharp and sour like old blood. Inside she found 3 things. A lock of blonde hair tied with red thread, a matchbox car, and a folded piece of paper. Her boys were blonde. Her hands shook as she opened the paper. It was torn from a notebook, stained with time. On it, in her husband's unmistakable scrawl, "I had to protect them. I had no choice. The man came from the water. He made a deal. You wouldn't have understood." Her legs gave out. What man? What deal? None of this made sense, but it was real. Too real. She took the box, the note, and the photo and left the woods, moving fast, stumbling more than once. When she got back to the house, she locked the doors and pulled every shade shut. For the first time since the photo surfaced, she wasn't just scared. She was terrified, not just for what might have happened to her boys, but for what George might have given, to keep them safe. Margaret barely recognized the woman staring back at her from the bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, jaw clenched, eyes wild. She splashed cold water over her cheeks, trying to steady her breath, but the tremble in her fingers wouldn't stop. The box was still on the kitchen table. That awful smell lingered in the air like rot soaked into the wallpaper. She knew she couldn't face this alone. There was only one person left she trusted, barely, and that was her sister, Joanne. They hadn't spoken in 6 years, not since the fight at George's funeral. Joanne had always believed something was wrong with him. A man don't go that quiet after his children vanish unless he's hiding something, she used to say. But Margaret, even in grief, had defended him. She dialed the number slowly. The phone rang 5 times. "Hello?" came the voice, raspy, cautious. "It's me," Margaret said softly. "I found something. About the boys. And about George." There was silence on the line. Then a long breath. "Jesus, Maggie, I always knew. I need you to come here now." Joanne lived 2 towns over, but she arrived by early evening. The moment she stepped inside the farmhouse, her face changed. "What's that smell?" Margaret pointed. To the box. Joanne stepped closer, peered inside. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Hair. A toy. A confession, maybe. She picked up the note with gloved fingers and read it. "He made a deal?" she repeated. "What the hell does that mean?" Margaret looked down. "I don't know, but he mentioned a man from the water." Joanne frowned. "The reservoir?" "No," Margaret whispered. "The old quarry. The one past the Devil's Mile." Joanne stiffened. "That's sealed off. Has been since the drownings in 72. They both fell quiet. The quarry had been a place of rumors. Kids used to swim there before they knew better. In 1972, 3 teenagers vanished without a trace during a night swim. No bodies were ever found. They said it was the current. Others said something lived in that water. something that took things. You think he went there? Joanne asked. I think he did something there, Margaret replied, and I think it has everything to do with the boys. Joanne sat down heavily. All right, then we go. Margaret blinked. You're serious? You called me for the truth, didn't you? You sure as hell aren't going alone. By dawn they were packed. Flashlight, rope, extra clothes, a crowbar. Joanne brought her husband's old pistol. Just in case it's not ghosts we're dealing with, she said. They parked a mile away from the quarry's edge and hiked the rest on foot. Trees grew tighter as they went, branches like fingers, brushing against their shoulders. The deeper they walked, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of dry leaves and their ragged breaths. Then they saw it, the quarry. It looked like a black hole in the earth. Still, bottomless, water reflecting nothing. The fence meant to keep people out had long rusted and collapsed. They stepped through. There was an old maintenance shack near the rim, abandoned but still standing. Joanne checked inside, empty except for a rusted lantern and a stack of rotting crates. Margaret wandered to the edge of the quarry, staring down into that thick, unmoving water. That's when she saw it. A shimmer, not in the water, but beneath it. Something pulsed, like a heartbeat. Faint, but steady. Not human. "Joe," she whispered. Joanne joined her, eyes wide. "You see it too?" Before Margaret could respond, a cold wind swept over the quarry, sudden and sharp. Leaves scattered. The flashlight flickered, and then a voice, a whisper, thin as thread, curling around their ears. "You came back, just like he promised." Margaret froze. Joanne turned, her face pale. "Tell me you heard that." But Margaret couldn't answer. She was looking down again. This time, there were faces under the water. 3 boys, watching. Her, smiling. Margaret stumbled back, nearly slipping on the gravel. "Joanne, I saw them, their faces, right there, under the water." Joanne rushed to the edge, but the surface was calm again, flat and silent, like before. "I don't see anything now," she whispered. "But I heard the voice too. It said he promised, George." "He promised something." Margaret's voice cracked. "He gave them away, my babies. He gave them to whatever this is." The wind dropped again. Stillness returned, pressing around them like a lid sealing shut. Joanne helped Margaret sit on a nearby stone slab, while both women stared out over the dark, glassy pit. "What do we do now?" Joanne finally asked. Margaret's eyes stayed locked on the water. "We need answers, and I think they're in that cabin." Joanne didn't ask which one. She knew. The one they saw in the woods, behind the Devil's Mile, with the new padlock, with the ground disturbed. That night, after returning home, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept hearing that voice, soft as fog. "You came back, just like he promised." Her sons' faces floated behind her eyes, still 6 years old, unchanged by time, smiling like nothing was wrong, like they wanted to be there. Joanne returned the next morning, her face grim, holding a crowbar and a thermos of strong coffee. "We break the lock today," she said. "We're not waiting for the past to find us first." They made the hike again, their nerves raw, flashlights bouncing off branches as they reached the cabin. The padlock still gleamed against the rotted door. Joanne jammed the crowbar under it. After a few hard jerks, the lock snapped. Margaret hesitated. "Ready?" Joanne asked. "No, but open it anyway." The door creaked open, spilling dim light into the cabin. Dust hung thick in the air. The smell hit them immediately. Mold, damp wood, and something worse underneath. Something coppery, like blood. Inside, the walls were covered in carvings, symbols neither of them recognized. Circles, lines, crude shapes of 3 figures, connected by roots or veins. There was a table in the corner, scratched up and blackened by what looked like old fire damage. On top of it lay an old journal. Joanne opened it carefully. It was George's handwriting. I didn't want to believe him, but he showed me. He told me what would happen if I didn't give them. He said they were special. 3. Always 3. Born under the blood moon. The old rules, the ones buried before the settlers came, they still apply. Something lives beneath the quarry, and it feeds on what's given. Joanne read aloud in a whisper. The man. He called himself the ferryman. Margaret's legs nearly gave out. He gave our sons to some kind of thing, like a sacrifice? Joanne flipped another page. He thought he was saving them. That by giving them up, the rest of the town would be safe. Safe from what? Margaret's voice broke. Before Joanne could answer, something shifted under the cabin floor. A thump, then another, faint but unmistakable. They froze, more thumps, then scraping. Something's under us, Joanne whispered. Margaret grabbed the flashlight and swept it across the floor. The panel in the corner looked newer than the rest. Joanne stepped forward and kicked it once. It cracked open, revealing a staircase, narrow and damp, leading into darkness. Don't tell me we're going down there, Joanne said. We have to, Margaret replied, her voice hard now. They're down there, I felt it. Joanne handed her the gun. Then you lead the way. They descended the stairs, every creak beneath them like a scream. The air grew colder, wet, like being swallowed. At the bottom they found a tunnel, stone walls, lined with strange etchings, pulsing faintly in the dark. And at the end of that corridor, a door, not wooden, not metal, something older, fleshy, veined, almost like it was alive. And on that door 3 handprints burned into the surface, small, child-sized, waiting. The moment Margaret touched the door, it pulsed under her palm, not like wood trembling, but like something breathing, warm, alive. Joanne grabbed her arm. Maggie, don't, that thing isn't natural. I don't care, she whispered. They touched it, all 3 of them. She placed her hand directly on the leftmost imprint. A soft hum echoed through the tunnel. Then, without warning, the middle and right handprints began to glow faint. Blue. Joanne backed away, her face pale. You see that? What the hell is this? The humming deepened. The door opened. It didn't swing. It folded inward, like peeling back skin from bone, revealing a dark chamber inside. Cold air surged out, thick with a strange scent, not just decay, but something sweet, like spoiled honey. They stepped through. The chamber was circular, maybe 20 feet across. The walls were carved with more of those ancient markings, but deeper now, more deliberate. Margaret didn't understand them, but they stirred something in her gut. Something old, primal. In the center of the room was a stone platform, and on that platform stood 3 figures, boys, still 6 years old, still wearing the same clothes they had on the day they vanished, now frayed, but untouched by time. Simon? Margaret's voice cracked. One of them turned. It was him, her son. Those same sharp blue eyes, but they were wrong now, too still, too calm. No recognition in them, just silence. Samuel and Silas turned next, in perfect unison. Mum, they said together, voices flat, echoing like wind through a hollow. Place? Margaret dropped to her knees, tears streamed down her face. I've looked for you every day, every damn day. Joanne stepped closer. Why do they look the same? Why haven't they aged? The boys tilted their heads, all 3 at once. Then Simon stepped forward. We are not lost, he said. We are chosen. Chosen by who? Joanne asked. The chamber trembled. Not an earthquake. More like something. Shifting. Waking. Then the voice returned. Not in the air, in their heads. You broke the pact. Joanne clutched her head, wincing. It's in my mind, I can't... Jesus, it's like claws digging into my skull. Margaret stood, reaching for her boys. Take me instead, let them go. But they didn't move, didn't blink. Simon spoke again. You can't take our place. The pact was sealed by blood. His blood. Margaret's heart skipped. George, he gave you to this thing and you stayed? He lied, Samuel whispered. He told us you were dead. He said we were cursed, Silas added. Said we were dangerous. Joanne's eyes widened. Wait, what if they are? That's when the humming returned, loud now all around them, pressing into their skulls like a migraine. The stone walls pulsed with blue veins. The markings glowed brighter. And behind the boy, something began to rise. A shape, tall, thin, human-shaped, but stretched. Wet skin, grey and glistening. No face, just a void where the mouth should be. Long fingers twisted backwards. And draped around its neck, like trophies, were strings of children's teeth. Margaret froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The creature stepped forward, impossibly quiet, like it slid rather than walked. Joanne raised the gun. Fired. The shot echoed, deafening. The bullet hit the creature's chest. Nothing happened, it kept coming. Then the triplets spoke in unison. "Ferryman!" The air changed. The walls began to bleed, thick black ooze pouring from the cymbals. The door behind them slammed shut. They were trapped. The ferryman raised one hand. Joanne screamed, clutched her head again. Margaret stepped forward, screaming, over the hum. "What do you want from me?" The ferryman paused. Then, without moving his mouth, the words came again, inside her skull. "One blood must stay, one may walk free, you choose." Her knees buckled. One. Only one of her sons could leave, and she had to choose which one. Margaret stared at the creature, her legs trembling beneath her. The words it had carved into her mind were still echoing. "One blood must stay. One may walk free. You choose." Her sons, her boys, stood silently on the stone platform, watching her. Like they were waiting for her to decide. Like they understood the rules of this nightmare in a way she didn't. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not choosing between my children." The ferryman tilted his head. A low groan trembled through the walls, almost like disappointment. Joanne grabbed Margaret's arm, her voice raw. "Maggie, we need to think. This thing, whatever it is, plays by some ancient rule. George made a deal. Maybe there's a way to undo it, a loophole." "There's no loophole when you're dealing with monsters," Margaret whispered. "There's just blood." Samuel stepped forward. "If one of us stays, the others can live." "You've already been here 29 years, Margaret cried. "That's not living." The ferryman took another step. Behind him, the stone twisted and writhed, as if it were breathing. A dozen shapes shifted in the wall, and faces, children's faces, dozens of them, pale, screaming, frozen in the rock. "God!" Joanne gasped, backing away. "They're trapped here, forever." Simon looked up at his mother. "It has to be one of us. That's how it always was. One. Child. Every generation. George didn't follow the rule. He gave all three. That broke the pact." "That's why it's bleeding," Silas said quietly. "It's angry." Margaret felt like she was falling. Her mind couldn't make sense of this. Ancient pacts, faceless gods, her children raised in darkness under the earth. She wasn't strong enough for this. She was a mother. Just a mother. And now she was supposed to pick which one of her sons could be free. She looked at Joanne, eyes wild. "What do I do? How can I choose?" Joanne stared at her, torn. "We don't know if it's telling the truth. It's a demon, or a god, or something worse. It's been feeding off fear for decades, maybe centuries. But Maggie, if we don't choose, it might take all three again." "No," Margaret whispered. "Not again." She looked at her sons. Tears blurred her vision. "I don't want to lose any of you." Simon walked closer. "If you must. Choose me." Margaret's heart cracked. "Why?" He smiled softly. "Because I remember your voice the most." Her hand covered her mouth. Her knees gave way and she fell to the floor. "No," she sobbed. "Please don't make me do this." Behind her, the ferryman moved closer. The humming grew louder. Black veins crept up the walls like ivy. Time was running out. Silas stepped forward. "If Simon stays, me and Samuel can leave. But if you don't choose, if none of us go, then the pact resets. We all stay. And it feeds." Joanne's voice was hoarse. "Then we burn the whole place to the ground. We bring this goddamn thing down." "No," Simon said calmly. "It can't be destroyed. It's older than language, older than death." Joanne raised the gun again, but this time she didn't fire. Her hand shook. "I swear to God, if it tries to touch you again—" "It doesn't need to touch," Simon whispered. "It lives inside promises, bargains." And Margaret understood. This wasn't about fire or guns or curses. It was about sacrifice. Her sons were being forced to play a game their father started, and now the rules had changed. She looked one last time at Simon, at that soft, strange smile on his lips. "You'll stay?" He nodded. "You're sure?" "I don't feel pain here," he said. "I don't feel time. It's not the same for us. But Samuel and Silas, they want to go home." Margaret turned to the ferryman. "Take me instead." The room fell silent. "Too late," the voice replied. "Only blood of pact may bind the seal." And the choice was made. Simon stepped back onto the platform. The other two walked forward. The ferryman raised both arms, and the ground beneath Margaret cracked open. The crack in the stone spread like lightning across the floor, splitting in jagged, glowing lines that pulsed with sick blue light. Margaret shielded her eyes as the ground shook beneath her. The ferryman stepped aside, its long arms stretched outward like it was summoning something from the earth itself. Silas and Samuel walked forward slowly, their faces still eerily calm, as if this nightmare was simply a walk through a memory. Margaret reached out as they passed her, and they both paused just long enough for her to brush her fingers against. Their arms. They felt real, warm. Not ghosts, not hallucinations. Her boys. Joanne stood frozen, gun lowered, eyes wide. What now? What happens to Simon? Margaret turned toward the stone platform. Simon stood alone now, his eyes reflecting the pulsing light. The ferryman moved behind him, towering like a shadow made flesh. Then Simon knelt, not out of fear but ritual, and placed both palms flat on the platform. The crack sealed, the shaking stopped, and in an instant, everything changed. The walls lost their glow, the carved symbols darkened, the heavy air seemed to lift, like a pressure valve being released. The ferryman vanished, no puff of smoke, no dramatic collapse. It simply wasn't there anymore. Simon slowly turned his head toward them. He smiled, truly smiled this time, and then the platform beneath him began to sink into the floor like soft mud swallowing stone. Margaret lunged forward. "No!" He raised one hand in farewell. "You kept your promise, Mama." The ground closed over him, seamless, gone. The room fell silent. No echoes, no humming, just breath and the soft drip of water from some crack above them. Joanne lowered the gun. "Is it over?" "I don't know," Margaret said softly, falling to her knees. But Silas and Samuel walked to her now, slowly, awkwardly, like children learning to move in new bodies. They each wrapped an arm around her, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Margaret Henley felt the weight of her sons pressed against her shoulders. Tears flowed down her face like rain. Joanne wiped her own eyes. "We need to leave. Before it decides the deal wasn't enough." Margaret nodded. They retraced their steps back through the narrow tunnel, up the rotting stairs, out into the woods where morning was finally starting to push its way through the trees. It was a different kind of light, softer, but there was no joy in it, just quiet. Back at the farmhouse, Margaret sat the boys down in the kitchen. They looked around, confused, as if seeing the world for the first time. Silas stared at the ticking wall clock, eyes wide. Samuel ran his hand along the counter like it was the most incredible thing he'd ever touched. Joanne pulled Margaret aside. "What now?" "I don't know. They haven't aged." "I know. They talk, like they remember, but there's something off about them." "I know that too." Joanne hesitated. "We don't even know if they'll stay." Margaret looked at her. "They're home. That's all I care about." But even as she said it, something gnawed at the back of her mind. That last thing Simon had said before sinking into the floor. "You kept your promise." She hadn't. Made a promise, had she? That night as she lay in bed, the farmhouse quiet for the first time in forever, Margaret dreamed. She saw Simon, older, much older, standing on a shoreline of black water beneath a red moon. Behind him, shadows rose, hundreds of them. And then his voice came, quiet and calm, just like it had been. "The debt is not erased, only delayed. The seal will break again." Margaret sat up in bed, gasping for air, sweat soaking her nightgown. Down the hall, Silas and Samuel slept soundly, but in the corner of their room, she swore she saw something move, something tall, watching, waiting. Margaret didn't sleep again that night. She sat in the living room, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening. Every tick of the wall clock felt like thunder. Every creak in the house made her heart lurch. Joanne had gone home, promising to check in the next morning. The boys, Silas and Samuel, slept in their old room, which hadn't changed since 1980. Same dinosaur wallpaper. Same twin beds with the blue flannel sheets. But now it felt wrong. Off. Like the past was being forced onto the present, and it didn't quite fit anymore. She kept thinking about what Simon had said in her dream. The debt is not erased, only delayed. The seal would break again. What did that mean? As the sky began to turn pale outside the windows, Margaret heard something, a soft thud. Then another. Footsteps, but not from upstairs where the boys were, from beneath the house. Her heart nearly stopped. She moved toward the floor vent and crouched low. For a moment, nothing. Just the hum of old pipes. Then another sound. Scraping, like claws against wood. She backed away, breath shallow. Grabbing the flashlight, she headed to the cellar. The cellar door had been bolted for years. George had insisted on keeping it shut after rats kept digging under the house. But as Margaret slid the bolt now and stepped down into the cold, damp dark, she realized something had changed. There were markings on the walls, fresh ones, the same kind that had been in the ferryman's chamber. But this wasn't a place carved by ancient hands. These were drawn in chalk, small hands, child-sized. She turned the flashlight toward the far wall and froze. In the dirt, someone had etched a large circle with strange symbols inside it. In the center lay 3 stones. One had been crushed. Margaret gasped. 3. Always 3. 1 gone, 2 returned. But now they were rebuilding something. A ritual. Footsteps echoed above her. Quick. Light. She bolted up the stairs, bursting into the hallway just in time to see Silas slip into the attic. "Silas," she called out. No answer. She climbed after him, legs aching, and pushed open the attic door. Silas was standing in the corner, staring at something on the floor. It was an old family photo. The one from the summer before they vanished. She was holding all 3 of them on the porch swing, George beside her, half smiling. Silas spoke without turning around. "You were happy that day." "I was," she said gently. "You were all I ever wanted." He looked over his shoulder. "Then why did you forget us?" Margaret's breath caught. "I never forgot. You didn't try hard enough." His voice had changed, deeper, older, and his eyes, they were no longer that soft, bright blue. They were dark, swirling, like water. Margaret stepped back. Silas tilted his head. "The ferryman kept us because we were meant for something, not to die, to become something more. But when you pulled us out, you broke the cycle." "I saved you," Margaret whispered. "No," he said, "you stole us." Behind him, Samuel appeared in the doorway. His face was blank. "We were chosen," he said flatly. "We were meant to stay." Margaret's legs weakened. She dropped to her knees. "You're my boys." Silas knelt in front of her. "You were our mother." "Were?" Samuel raised his hand. From the center of his palm, a small flicker of blue light sparked, just like the symbols on the walls. And that's when Margaret understood. They didn't come back alone. They brought something with them. Margaret couldn't breathe, her eyes locked on the light pulsing from Samuel's palm, soft, flickering, but very much alive. The way it shimmered reminded her of the ferryman's chamber. The walls, the air, that hum that vibrated her bones. The same thing was now inside her son's. She stood slowly, her voice shaking. "What is that?" Samuel didn't blink. "It's the mark, the bond." "What bond?" she whispered. Though she was afraid she already knew. Silas spoke now, his voice colder than before. "The pact doesn't end with the trade. It changes, grows. The ferryman doesn't need to hold us anymore. We carry him now." Margaret stumbled back, heart thudding. No, this isn't what You pulled us out," Silas interrupted. "But something else came with us. The seal broke when Simon stayed behind. That place, It didn't close. It shifted. It followed. Samuel lifted his palm higher. The flicker grew into a steady flame now, bluish-white, and inside it, Margaret could see something forming. A symbol rotating slowly. 3 interlocked rings, bleeding at the edges. She knew then. This wasn't over. It had just begun. From downstairs something crashed. Margaret jumped. "Joanne," she gasped. She turned and bolted down the attic ladder, bare feet slapping the wood. She hit the hallway, just as Joanne was bursting through the front door, shotgun slung across her shoulder. "I had a dream," Joanne said breathlessly. "A nightmare. Something was whispering my name over and over." "You were right," Margaret said, grabbing her by the arm. "They didn't come back clean. They're infected, possessed. I don't know what to call it." Joanne glanced up toward the attic. "Where are they now?" Margaret didn't answer right away. The boys were still up there. But for how long? She didn't know what they could do. Not anymore. "We need help," Joanne muttered. "Not a priest, not a cop. Something else." Margaret turned toward the cellar door again, the hair on her arms rising. "No, we need to go back. We need to talk to Simon." Joanne looked at her like she was insane. "That place nearly killed us. You're saying we walk back into it?" "We don't have a choice," Margaret said. "If they're changing, if they're carrying that thing, then we need to know what it wants before it spreads." Joanne stared at her, silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go tonight." But upstairs, unseen, Silas stood at the attic window watching the trees sway. His eyes were entirely black now and a smile curled on his lips, slow, eerie, unnatural. Beside him, Samuel whispered, "They're going back." Silas replied, "Good." That night, just after sunset, Margaret and Joanne returned to the woods. They carried flashlights, rope, salt, and the shotgun. The air was colder than usual, for late June, and the trail to the cabin looked darker than ever, like something unseen had stripped the color from the world. The padlock Joanne had broken earlier still hung limp on the cabin door. They stepped inside, and to their surprise, the floor panel leading to the underground stairwell was already open. "Was it like that before?" Joanne asked. Margaret shook her head. "No." They descended slowly. The tunnel was even colder now. But the fleshy door that had once required her son's handprints, it was wide open, and inside the chamber had changed. The platform where Simon once stood was now gone, replaced by a pit that pulsed with deep blue light. All along the walls were new carvings, childlike, messy, but unmistakably recent. And standing at the edge of the pit was Simon, older now, 15, maybe 16, no longer 6. His voice was deeper when he spoke. "You came back," Margaret gasped. "Simon? Is it really you?" He smiled softly, but there was sorrow behind it. "Not for long. The time here runs different. The longer I stay, the more I become part of it." Joanne raised the flashlight. "Then tell us how to stop it. Your brothers. Something's happening." "To them." Simon nodded. "They're becoming vessels. It's what the ferryman wanted all along. Not just a trade. A way out." Margaret stepped forward, eyes full of fear. "Out of the pit." Simon shook his head slowly. "No. Out of this world." Margaret's knees buckled. Joanne caught her before she hit the stone floor, lowering her slowly beside the pit. The pulsing blue light from the abyss flickered like a heartbeat. But it didn't feel human. It felt wrong. Ancient. Simon stood at the edge, taller than before, face worn like someone who'd lived 100 lifetimes in silence. "The ferryman is using them?" Margaret asked, her voice hoarse. "Silas and Samuel." "He's inside them." Simon nodded. "Pieces of him, like embers waiting to spark. He couldn't escape with all 3 of us. But 2 was enough. He placed seeds in them. And now that you broke the seal..." His eyes flickered with regret. "He's waking." Joanne stepped forward, her jaw set. "Then we kill whatever's inside them." "No," Simon said quickly. "You kill them, he'll be reborn fully." He doesn't need the bodies, he needs the souls. As long as they remain intact, he stays dormant, half asleep, half blind. Margaret stared at the pit. Then how do we stop it? You bind? Them, Simon whispered. You make a new pact. Joanne scoffed. That's what got us into this hell to begin with. Not the same kind, Simon said. This one is made willingly, a blood promise, not for sacrifice, but for containment. Margaret looked up, eyes swimming with desperation. Explain it, everything. Simon lowered himself to the edge of the pit, legs crossed, hands in his lap like a monk in meditation. The ferryman was once like us, human, long ago, but he found a way to live between the cracks of the world, between life and death. He made himself into something else, something eternal, but to remain here he needed hosts, willing ones. And George gave you to him, Margaret whispered. He gave us all three, Simon said, which broke the natural rule. The ferryman had never been given triplets before. It split his power, made it unstable. We were his prison and his fuel, but you undid that when you pulled us out. Joanne shook her head, the pieces starting to click. So now he's scattered, inside your brothers, and he wants to reform. Yes, Simon said. And if he does, he won't need a pit or a pact anymore. He'll be free, and no one on earth will be able to stop him. Margaret stood. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was strong now. Then tell me what I have to do. Simon looked at her, solemn. You'll have to take them back to the place it all began, the quarry, at the hour of their disappearance. August 19th, just before sunset. You'll draw the binding circle. You'll give blood, your own. Then you'll speak. The words I'll give you, Margaret's voice broke. And then what? If it works, he'll stay buried. And if it doesn't? Simon's eyes were dark now. Then he rises, and the first thing he'll take is them. Margaret turned to Joanne. We've got 2 weeks until August 19th. We prepare. We study these symbols. We make the circle. We find a way to keep them close without letting him fully take over. Joanne nodded slowly. And if they figure out what we're doing? Then we lie, Margaret said, her voice low and firm, like their father did. Except this time, it's to save them. As they prepared to leave, Simon stood once more. Margaret hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. He whispered in her ear, I'll see you one last time on the 19th, but after that I'm gone. I won't be able to hold him back again. She stepped back. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Simon gave a soft smile. You did. You gave me peace. Now give them a chance. Then, as she turned to climb the stairs, she looked back one more time, and Simon was gone. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Margaret had always believed silence was a gift. After the boys vanished, she craved it, longed for it. But now the silence inside the house was a predator. It watched. It waited. Silas and Samuel didn't speak much. They slept through most of the day, their bodies sluggish like the world outside moved too fast for them. At night, though, they walked. Margaret heard them, whispers in the hallway, floorboards creaking at odd hours, soft thuds against the walls, like fingers tapping in rhythm. Sometimes she'd find the front door cracked open. Once she caught Silas standing barefoot in the yard at 3 a.m., staring up at the stars like he was waiting for something to answer back. Joanne stayed over most nights now, sleeping on the couch with the shotgun nearby and a thick Bible on her lap, not because she believed it would save them, but because it made her feel braver. 2 weeks, she'd say each morning. 2 weeks until we make the circle. But Margaret was starting to feel time differently now. Every hour stretched like taffy. The shadows in the house moved just a little too slow. And her boys, they didn't blink like normal people. Their eyes were too still, too dark. She kept Simon's words close. A new pact. Blood. Sunset. August 19th. She had already drawn the circle behind the house, down in the grass where the swing set used to be. Chalk wouldn't do. She carved it into the earth with a shovel, following Simon's markings from the chamber. It was wide, nearly 10 feet in diameter, with 3 points for each of the triplets and a 4th in the center for the ferryman. himself. Every day she added more to it: salt, iron, bone dust from the old family cat, which Simon had specifically mentioned, the bones of something loved. It felt cruel, but she did it anyway. One morning, Joanne found a strange symbol drawn in charcoal on her car hood. 3 circles, interlocking, the same one Margaret had seen burning in Samuel's palm. "They're starting to remember who they really are," Joanne muttered. "Or what's inside them is waking up." Margaret nodded. "I know." She hadn't told Joanne about the dream she'd had the night before. In it, Samuel stood at her bedside, eyes black and wet like oil. He leaned close and whispered, "The seal was never yours to break, but you did. So now, you belong to him, too." That morning, she found scratch marks down her bedroom wall, deep ones. That night, she locked the boys' door for the first time. Felt like betrayal. But she had to do it. She stood outside their door, forehead pressed to the wood, whispering softly, "I love you. I'm going to save you, even if you hate me." From inside, Samuel spoke, calm and clear. "We don't hate you, Mum." She froze. "We just don't need you anymore." Her hand trembled on the knob. She backed away and returned downstairs, every part of her aching. The next day, while Joanne was in town gathering supplies for the ritual, Margaret ventured into the woods behind the cabin one last time. Not to see Simon. He was gone. But she felt like something else was waiting. She reached the quarry. By noon, the water shimmered, unmoving, thick as tar. At the edge of the broken fence, she found something stuck between the rusted wires. A photograph, weather-worn, folded in half. She opened it. It was hers and all 3 boys, but not from the past. From now. From this week. They stood in front of the farmhouse. She was smiling, Samuel and Silas on either side of her, but "Simon?" Simon stood further back, eyes hollow, hands dripping with black water. Someone had written a message across the bottom in red ink. "You took them out, but he never left." Margaret sank to her knees. The ferryman was already here. He always had been. August 17th. 2 days left. Margaret had never felt time so heavy on her back. The kind of weight you couldn't carry without it breaking something inside you. The boys were changing fast now. Samuel rarely spoke anymore. He spent most of his time standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the binding circle Margaret carved into the grass. He never commented on it, just watched it, like it was his grave. Silas was worse. At night he muttered to himself, not in English, but in that strange whispering tongue Margaret first heard in the ferryman's chamber. The symbols she'd scrubbed off the cellar wall kept reappearing, this time carved into wood, into her bedroom door. Every morning Joanne and Margaret would find something new: salt circles broken, the bones from the cat missing, the iron symbols flipped upside down. "He's testing us," Joanne said, gripping the shotgun tighter, "trying to see if we'll give up before the ritual." Margaret nodded. "But we won't." That night, Margaret awoke to the sound of the piano downstairs. She hadn't played it in years. It belonged to her mother, always slightly out of tune. Now it played. Soft, discordant notes like a child pressing keys without understanding them. She crept down the stairs. Silas was there, sitting at the piano, hands hovering over the keys but never touching them. Instead, the keys moved on their own. Margaret watched, frozen in the dark. Silas turned slowly toward her. His face was blank, but his eyes were bleeding black tears. "He's almost ready," he whispered. "Just one more night." Margaret reached out, but the second she stepped forward, the room changed. The walls stretched, warped, peeling like wet paper. The kitchen dissolved into shadows. The piano cracked and turned to ash in front of her. And standing in the center of the room, the ferryman, not a figure of flesh this time, a silhouette all shadow, arms too long, fingers like branches twisted backward, a face that had no mouth, but somehow smiled anyway. Margaret couldn't move. She couldn't even scream. The ferryman leaned close, head tilting as if curious. Then it placed one long, bony finger against Silas's chest. Silas's eyes rolled back. His mouth opened in a silent gasp, and the ferryman poured into him. Black smoke, liquid shadow, something ancient and wet and cold. When it was done, Silas slumped to the floor. The room snapped back, normal again. The piano, the walls, the lights. Margaret gasped, choking on air, dragging Silas away from the bench. His body twitched, eyes wide open, lips trembling. But it wasn't Silas anymore. Not fully. Just a shell now. Joanne rushed in, saw the boy on the ground and immediately dropped beside them. What happened? Margaret looked up, voice broken. It's inside him now. The last piece. He's complete. Joanne paled. Then it started. The final phase. Margaret clutched Silas to her chest. He was cold, not dead, but close, like something was draining his life force from the inside. We finish the circle tomorrow, she said. We complete the pact. Joanne nodded, tears building in her eyes. And if it tries to stop us? We bury it, Margaret said, with our own blood if we have to. And upstairs, unnoticed, Samuel stared down at them from the railing, eyes glowing faintly blue. He wasn't whispering anymore. He was listening. August 18th, the final night. The farmhouse felt like it was holding its breath. Every window had been covered. Salt lined the doors. The symbols Simon had given. Them were painted in charcoal across the walls, floor and ceiling. Joanne had sharpened every blade in the house. Margaret carried a small vial of her own blood, just as the ritual required. It had to be hers, not anyone else's. The mother's blood, the link to all three sons. Silas remained motionless, lying on the couch like a fallen puppet. His skin had grown pale, and every few minutes his body twitched, like something inside him was pulling at the threads. Margaret sat by him, stroking his hair. She kept whispering stories to him, hoping he was still in there somewhere. You remember when you got stung by a bee and blamed it on Simon? Said he trained it like a pet? You were 5. I laughed so hard I nearly burned dinner. No reaction, not even a flicker. Upstairs, Samuel hadn't come out of his room in almost 12 hours. The door was shut, and every time Margaret approached it, she felt something press against her chest, an invisible weight. I think it's too late for him, Joanne said quietly. No, Margaret replied. Not yet. We've got until sunset. Joanne leaned in. You do realize that if the ritual fail, we might not be strong enough to stop what comes out of them. Margaret didn't flinch. Then we die trying. That night, just past midnight, Margaret heard footsteps again, but this time it wasn't one of the boys, it was heavier, deliberate. She followed the sound to the back porch, where she found the screen door wide open, swinging gently in the wind. Standing in the yard was a man, tall, thin, pale, wearing George's clothes. Margaret's breath caught. No. The man turned slowly. And it was George, or what was left of him. His eyes were completely white, glowing faintly. His skin looked brittle, like old paper soaked in water. He smiled. You kept the promise, after all. Margaret stepped onto the porch, clutching the frame. You're not him! The thing tilted its head, lips curling. No, but he was the first. The first to break the rules, the first to see what lies beneath. You tricked him. I offered him truth, it said calmly, and in return, he gave me 3 doors. Her voice trembled. My sons. Children are keys, especially when born together, especially when the blood runs deep with grief. The thing raised a hand. He never wanted them to die, Margaret. Just to be safe, just to be chosen. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Chosen for what? To carry me. The ferryman smiled. Your womb was the vessel. Their lives were the price. And now, the pact completes itself. 1 vessel was left behind. 2 returned, but you? It stepped closer. You're the last piece. A jolt of cold ran through her. No, she whispered. Simon told me how to bind you. He told me how to bury you again. The ferryman laughed, deep, low, like thunder from beneath the earth. Simon doesn't understand what he's become. He holds a fragment of me too. They all do. You can't bind what's already inside you. Suddenly a scream echoed from upstairs. Samuel. Then crashing, a door slamming open, Joanne yelling. Margaret ran back into the house just as Joanne flew down the stairs, shotgun aimed. He's awake, and he's not alone. Samuel appeared at the top of the stairs, but it wasn't him anymore. His mouth had split into a jagged grin, eyes glowing with swirling blue fire. His skin pulsed, veins rising under. It like worms. Behind him the walls cracked. Something was pushing through. The ferryman was coming. Margaret grabbed Joanne by the arm. Tomorrow, sunset. We finish it, no matter what. Joanne nodded once. We hold this house until then. And upstairs Samuel's voice echoed, layered with something inhuman. Tomorrow we all go home. August 19th. The sun rose behind heavy clouds, turning the sky a dull, bruised grey. Rain threatened in the distance, but nothing fell. The air was still, too still. Margaret stood barefoot in the backyard, staring down at the circle she'd spent 2 weeks carving into the dirt. It was ready. Salt, blood, bone, iron, all the pieces Simon had told her she'd need. The 3 outer points were marked by the boys' birthstones, ones she'd kept in her jewelry box for years. In the center lay a shallow dish, empty, waiting. For her final gift. She'd already pricked her finger. Drops of her blood dotted the stone. But there was one thing still missing. Them. Joanne stepped out onto the porch, her face lined with exhaustion. The storm's holding off, that's something. They're still inside? Margaret asked. Joanne nodded. Samuel hasn't moved from the hallway upstairs, just stands there, watching, breathing too slowly. And Silas? Joanne hesitated. He's awake, but not awake, if that makes sense. He blinked at me once, almost like he recognized me. Then he whispered something in that language again. Margaret's eyes dropped to the circle. He's still in there, a piece of him. If Simon could fight it, maybe Silas can too. Joanne stepped closer. You really think this will work? Margaret didn't answer at first. Then, I don't know, but it's all we've got. Inside, the house had become a cage of tension. The floor creaked even when no one walked. The walls felt too close. The light bulbs dimmed and flickered even though the power was fine. Shadows moved without anything casting them. At exactly 5:42 p.m., the same time the boys vanished 29 years ago, Margaret stood in the hallway. Samuel, she called softly. He turned, eyes still glowing, grin stretched wide. It's time. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then his voice dropped several octaves like it came from 1,000 mouths at once. The gate is already open. You cannot unmake what is born. You want to be born? Margaret asked, her voice steady. Then come to the circle. We'll welcome you there. Samuel tilted his head, amused. You think this little spell will stop me? I don't need to stop you, she said. I just need to bind you. The way you've always been, locked in the bones of my children. He grinned. Then let's see if you still remember how to scream. At 6 p.m., as the sun began to lower through the grey clouds, they gathered at the circle. Silas stood in one corner, Samuel in another. The third point remained empty. Margaret would stand there, holding Simon's bloodstone in her hand. The last link. Joanne held the shotgun. Her finger was shaking on the trigger. Samuel began to hum. The sky darkened unnaturally fast. Wind rose out of nowhere. The trees bent. The earth beneath their feet thrummed. Margaret knelt at the center and poured her blood into the dish. The circle pulsed once, then again. The language spilled from her lips, not hers but Simon's. Words from that ancient tongue vibrating with power, shaking the leaves from branches. The wind howled louder. Samuel screamed, his body twisted, veins blackening. The ferryman surged, through his skin like smoke beneath glass. But then Silas spoke. I remember now, he whispered. The porch swing, the bee sting, the pancakes you burned on my birthday. His voice cracked. I remember you, Mom. Margaret looked at him, tears falling freely. Come back, baby. He stepped into the circle fully. The lines glowed. The binding had begun. The ferryman roared. Samuel collapsed, twitching. His body levitated slightly. head thrown back, mouth wide, eyes glowing blue-hot. The ground cracked beneath him, and the voice echoed across the woods. "This is not your right." But Margaret stood strong. "It's not about rights," she shouted. "It's about blood." And she slammed her palm into the center dish. The circle erupted with light. The ritual had begun. The circle blazed to life. Blue fire erupted from its edges, the symbols Margaret had carved into the dirt now glowing like veins of molten light. The wind howled, swirling around, them in a perfect spiral. The trees groaned as if they too were trying to resist what was coming. Samuel screamed, not a child's scream, not even human anymore. It was the sound of something ancient being dragged from its nest. His body floated a foot above the earth, back arched, limbs stiff. His mouth hung open, and from it shadows poured, black mist twisting like smoke, clawing at the air, trying to escape the circle. The ferryman was fighting back. Joanne stood just outside the glowing edge, shotgun aimed at Samuel, but Margaret raised a hand. "No, if he dies now, it finishes the transfer. He becomes the gate." Joanne clenched her jaw. "Then keep chanting, before it's too late." Margaret's lips moved faster now, her voice trembling under the force of what she was calling down. The incantation Simon had taught her burned her throat, but she kept going. The words came from her blood, not her brain, ancient syllables that had lived in her bones since the day she birthed the triplets. Silas knelt inside the circle, clutching his head, fighting to stay present. His eyes flashed, blue, then black, then blue again. "He's pulling me in," he gasped. "Mom, he wants to swap us." "What?" Margaret asked, pausing the chant. "If I take Samuel's place and if I break my part of the seal, he'll be whole." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You stay right where you are." The light dimmed for a moment. Samuel dropped back to the ground, convulsing violently. The ferryman was losing his grip. But just as Margaret started chanting again, something shifted. Reality blinked. For a split second, she wasn't in the backyard anymore. She was back in 1980, on the porch, her boys playing in the grass, George inside laughing. It was the day they vanished. Everything was right. Simon looked up at her and waved. But something was wrong. The sun was too red, the air too still. She stepped forward, and her foot passed through the swing. An illusion. A memory trap. The ferryman was showing her what she wanted, trying to rewrite the ritual from inside her mind. If she stayed too long, she'd forget everything, forget the pain, the truth. The circle. "Wake up, Mum," a voice whispered. "Simon." She turned. He stood behind her, older now, smiling sadly. "You're strong enough to end it," he said, "but not if you believe the lie." She blinked and was back, kneeling. Inside the circle, her hand still pressed to the dish, blood still warm beneath her palm. Joanne was screaming. Samuel was shrieking. The ritual had nearly broken. She took a breath and screamed the final line. "I offer blood to bind blood. May the gate remain shut." A shockwave burst from the center. The shadows around Samuel exploded outward, screaming like banshees. The ferryman howled from inside him, a sound of fury and hunger and something betrayed. The sky went white for a second. And then, silence. Samuel collapsed, unconscious. Silas opened his eyes, clear and wet with tears. "Mom." Margaret reached for him, sobbing. "I'm here." The circle was still glowing faintly. Not blue now, but soft white, bound, contained, sealed. Joanne dropped to her knees beside them. "Is it over?" Margaret looked down at Samuel's still body. His chest rose and fell, slow but steady. Silas was blinking rapidly, like waking from a long, dark dream. And Margaret, she finally let herself breathe. "I think we did it." But somewhere in the woods, far from the circle, something still watched and waited. Because ancient things don't die. They remember. 3 days later, the farmhouse was quiet. Too quiet. But this time, it wasn't because something terrible was about to happen. It was the kind of stillness that follows a storm. The moment when the ground is soaked, the trees are bent, and everything is just catching its breath. Margaret sat in the living room, sipping cold coffee, her eyes locked on the two boys. Curled up on the couch, Samuel hadn't spoken since the ritual, not a word, but his eyes were his own again, no longer glowing, no longer void, just tired, like he'd been somewhere far away for far too long. Silas, on the other hand, was more alert. He helped with breakfast, he asked about the old family photos. He laughed softly when Joanne made a joke, and once, just once, he whispered to Margaret while hugging her, "I knew you'd come for us." But still, there was something behind his eyes, a shadow, the kind you don't cast, the binding. Circle in the backyard had stopped glowing, but Margaret refused to disturb it. Not for a long time. She let the grass grow wild around it, let the earth settle. The ritual had sealed the ferryman back in the pit, or inside whatever fractured realm he came from, but no one said it would last forever. Simon was gone now. That part hurt the most. They never saw him again after the ritual. Not in dreams. Not in the woods, not in flickers of memory or whispers. Just gone. Margaret hoped that meant peace, that he had finally been released from the ferryman's grip, that whatever part of him had been twisted and used had found rest. Joanne stayed, in town longer than planned. She said she was helping, but Margaret knew the truth. Neither of them wanted to be alone just yet. One night, as the sun set red over the trees, Silas came out onto the porch, barefoot, arms crossed over his chest. He stared out toward the trees, toward the quarry. "Do you remember it?" Margaret asked from behind him. He nodded. "Some of it. Not all, just feelings, like echoes." "You don't have to talk about it," she said. "I know." He turned to her then, face serious. "It's still watching." Margaret's chest tightened. "The ferryman?" He shook his head. "Not him. The thing that made him." She swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet," Silas said. "But it's older, deeper. It sleeps beneath, even him." Margaret felt the earth shift under her feet, not literally, but in her gut. The ritual had sealed one evil. But maybe there were others. Maybe this wasn't the end, just the first warning. She walked over, wrapped her arms around her son, felt the heartbeat against her chest. He was real. He was home. That had to count for something. Inside, Samuel slept curled up in a blanket, clutching an old stuffed dinosaur from his childhood, the only toy that had survived the years untouched. And outside, the stars began to rise. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and far beneath the soil, something pulsed once. Slow, faint, remembering.